Hey everyone, and welcome to this Explain. Let's jump right into our core mystery here. At what exact point did early humans stop just, surviving and actually start believing in the supernatural? It's such a fascinating question because for millions of years, our earliest hominin ancestors showed absolutely zero archaeological traces of religious thought. So, when exactly did that shift happen? To wrap our heads around this deep time, we really need to map out the 5 major eras of prehistory. We start way back in the Lower Paleolithic, 2.5 million years ago, then move through the Middle and Upper Paleolithic, into the Neolithic, and finally the Bronze and Iron Ages. Across this massive, sprawling timeline, we are looking for that very first spark of faith. That moment when the human mind started leaving behind something far more complex than just stone tools.
All right, starting off with Section 1, Earliest Sparks of Belief. We're looking at the ambiguous clues of the Middle Paleolithic. So we begin our search with our close cousins, the Neanderthals. And honestly, there is a fierce academic debate about the clues they left behind. On one side, some scholars argue Neanderthals had clear concepts of an afterlife, and they point to intentional burials at sites like La Ferrasi, the use of red ochre pigments, and these really strange, stacked cave bear skulls. But on the flip side, other experts impartially point out that this might just be mere speculation. They argue these rituals could have just been practical social bonding exercises, pre-religious teaching mechanisms, or, in the case of those bears, simply natural cave deaths that just accumulated over millennia. It's a completely open, fascinating mystery. Moving forward, we reach Section 2, Art, Shamans and Burials, and the Upper Paleolithic Explosion. As we cross the threshold to about 50,000 years ago, Homo sapiens usher in an explosive era of unmistakable spiritual complexity. Just picture the tangible evidence from the famous Sungir burial in Russia. A middle-aged man was buried completely doused in ochre, wearing 3,000 hand-carved mammoth ivory beads, 25 ivory armbands, and a headband surrounded by 12 fox canine teeth. I mean, think about the time that took. This level of painstaking bodily adornment definitively proves early humans had sophisticated concepts of an afterlife. You just don't put thousands of hours of labor into a grave unless you fully believe the journey continues. These incredibly intricate burials, along with that vivid, visionary cave art featuring part human, part animal figures, they point directly to shamanism. Early spiritual leaders likely used intense trance states to interact with the unseen spirit world and act as healers. And what's wild is these states were potentially driven by our very own hardwired brain chemistry. Archaeologists call it the neuropsychological model. Basically, you could say it was humanity's original, naturally occurring hallucinogen.
Which brings us to Section 3, the Lord of the Animals, the Sovereign of the Wild. Within this shamanic worldview, a specific, universal figure started emerging across widely separated continents. But this Lord of the Animals wasn't just a free pass for hunters to take whatever they wanted. No way. This spirit enforced strict, respectful rules. Hunters couldn't just kill wantonly. They had to meticulously save and respect the bones of the dead animal, truly believing the Lord would use those exact bones to recreate the creature. It was a relationship based on profound respect, and it absolutely required pre-hunt pleas for success and post-hunt offerings of gratitude.
And guys, this isn't just a modern theory. We literally have the physical proof. The discovery of a headless clay bear in the Montespan cave in France gives us incredible, tangible evidence of these ancient rituals. The clay base was likely draped in a real bear skin, and an actual bear skull was placed right between its front legs during ceremonies. It perfectly illustrates that deep, deep reverence for large game and the incredibly careful handling of their remains.
What's really amazing is that these beliefs survived into much more recent times. We can hear clear echoes of this deep reverence in the pygmy incantation to their creator god, who manifests to humans as a rainbow and communicates through a giant, immortal blue elephant named Gore. That spiritual instinct to revere the masters of the wild game? It's a deeply rooted human tradition.
Of course, the animal lord adapted to the environment too. For hunters of the sea, the lord lived in the deep. This is perfectly shown by the dramatic Inuit myth of Sedna, the goddess of the sea. It's a pretty brutal story of betrayal. Her father throws her from a kayak and severs her fingers as she clings to the boat. But those severed fingers actually transform into seals and walruses, and she becomes the ultimate protector of sea mammals on the ocean floor. Shamans literally had to travel in a trance down to the deep to pacify her, just so she would release the animals for the hunt.
But everything, and I mean everything, changed with the next era. Welcome to Section 4, the Neolithic agricultural shift. This era completely rewired human faith.
Around 12,000 BC, the invention of agriculture fundamentally changed the human brain and how we worshipped. And the comparison here is stark. Farming created massive food surpluses, which in turn birthed centralized power and intense social inequality. We completely shifted away from egalitarian hunter-gatherer bands who communicated directly with animal spirits. Now we're looking at highly stratified agricultural societies. Faith suddenly focused on the harvest, on grain gods, and on an elite spiritual aristocracy of priests and quote-unquote big men who mediated with the divine on behalf of everyday commoners.
So this new elite needed ways to cement their power, right? And they did it with stone. They built absolutely staggering monuments, like Stonehenge, using intense, backbreaking labor. But these megaliths weren't just impressive architecture. They were perfectly aligned with the solar and lunar cycles to track those all-important agricultural calendars. More importantly, they served as massive mausoleums. They highlighted that intense social inequality we just talked about and hosted cults dedicated purely to the ancestors of these elite spiritual leaders. Now, you've probably heard the famous narrative that the Neolithic era was this peaceful matriarchy worshipping a singular great goddess. And there's evidence people point to, like widespread Eurasian Venus figurines, complex statues, and a focus on female fertility charms. But we have to look at this impartially, because many experts heavily contest this theory. They point out that the methodology is heavily flawed and overly broad, grouping vastly different cultures together. They also highlight a massive prevalence of animal and beast worship over human deities and a lack of parallels in modern hunter-gatherer societies. It's a huge debate that still powerfully shapes how we view our ancestors today.
That brings us to our Proto-Historic era in Section 5, the Bronze and Iron Ages, water, weapons, and writing. Early writing begins to capture these ancient faiths just as metalworking completely transforms them. And a really fascinating shift happens right here. Bronze Age Europeans began viewing wet places as liminal portals, basically doorways bridging the world of the living and the world of the dead. They routinely sacrificed their most incredibly valuable crafted items, think bronze weapons, ships, statuettes, and threw them straight into rivers, lakes, and bogs as direct offerings to the spirits residing in the underworld beneath the water.
And because languages evolve in really predictable ways, by looking at shared language roots, we can actually reconstruct the religion of the Proto-Indo-Europeans. Their mythology featured a powerful, supreme sky god, alongside a thunder god and a water grandson. They believed the path to a green pasture afterlife was treacherous, separated by a hound-guarded maelstrom, and their priests likely consumed psychoactive drinks of immortality during their rituals. It's absolutely amazing that we can literally rebuild a lost faith just from the echoes left in our modern words. And speaking of echoes, we've arrived at our final section, Modern Echoes of Prehistory, and Reconstructing the Ancient Past. You might think all these prehistoric beliefs are long gone, just locked away in dusty museums, but they actually echo incredibly loudly in our world right now. Today, new religious movements and reconstructionists are actively reviving these ancient practices. Groups practicing heathenry, Celtic neo-paganism, and neo-Druidism are painstakingly rebuilding Bronze and Iron Age faiths. This even leads to modern clashes. Practitioners sometimes protest academic archaeologists over the excavation of bones at sacred sites like Stonehenge, passionately arguing that these ancient ancestral identities deserve modern spiritual respect, not just scientific study. And even beyond actual faith, these ancient spiritual themes live on in our pop culture. Speculative, prehistoric fiction about our ancestors' earliest beliefs is wildly successful. Books like John M. Owl's Earth's Children series project our modern fascination onto Paleolithic religions, heavily shaping the public imagination and creating these vivid pictures that resonate deeply with millions of readers today.
Which leaves us with a crucial final thought to ponder. We've traded stone tools for smartphones, and we've seen how agriculture and metal fundamentally change the structure of our societies. But honestly, our core desires remain exactly the same. Are our modern religions, our pop culture obsessions, and our spiritual instincts really any different from the ones that first painted beasts on cave walls? Next time you look up at the stars, ask yourself, who is really looking back? Thanks so much for joining me on